Dr. Power, guests have arrived.
Thanks, Bonnycastle. Hey, folks, come on in. Welcome to week 4. It's just again about the halfway session. Today, by the way, Bonnycastle gave me a clock. I apologize for last week. I got into it and just kept rambling, and more than you need. I know you don't need an hour of this, so I'm going to try to keep it closer to half an hour. And I've got my little clock here, and I'll keep watching it as we go through it. Well, the assignment ones are in. I'm marking like mad. Understand I've got a day job as well as intellectual lead for quite a number of courses and some associate faculty, but I'm pushing through them as fast as I can. They look remarkably good. I'm very pleased with what I've seen so far. I'll do my best before you see this, or when you see this on Monday. I'll have them all marked between now and through the weekend and back to you. I say my aim is before Monday, so you'll have them to work on and get some sense of what I'm looking for as you go into your assignment number 2. And assignment number 2, just to recap very quickly, Internet of Everything. You've got your topic, what you're looking for. The recipe, and there's flexibility. There's no left foot, right foot in this class, but a big white picket fence to play in. But my sense would be that you'll probably have a title page, an executive summary, a table of content, introduction, body, conclusion. You'll have appendixes that don't fit in within the word count. Stick them at the back as appendixes in any charts tables, and some sort of a reference citation page that puts me up in the APA method. But I say this course is about form rather than substance, so while I will look for the citations and the correctness of them, I don't spend an awful lot of time on them, and I would very seldom deduct points for anything that's missed. But over the course of the program, keep working at it, and you'll pick up that skill set. But I know many of you, like I was, when you come back as a mature learner and not exposed to that until you're in your 30s and 40s, it takes a little while to ramp back up into an academic sort of environment. So those come back to what else is on my mind there is, yeah, the good news is on the discussion sites, I'm very pleased. Good news is that lots of great discussion taking place, wonderful, meaty, evidence-based citations supporting the post. I'm absolutely delighted, and lots of them are coming in. And of course, that's the good news. The bad news is, of course, is just that lots are coming in, and I'm sure, like you, we're all working hard to try to keep up with the dialogue and the exchange. But wonderful intellectual capital, and this class is particularly rich based on each and every one of you and what you bring to the table. As I've said, I think in the last, I think I said in last week's video, that while I've been doing this now, this particular course for 16 years at this institution, I would say you are number one with respect to what you bring to the table and your expertise and stuff and experience. So I'm delighted for that, and I'm sure you sense it too when you work with your colleagues, how well versed they are in a broad range of things that we're able to discuss and have some expertise in the room. So that's that. Now let's get on to the news if we can. Alberta. Alberta, of course, the new budget there, it's interesting. They're putting more money off the back of the bus to stimulate the economy, $61 billion further in the hole. And I read somewhere, not in the Globe, but somewhere I read the article that by 2020, at the rate they're going, it's just under $50 billion will be the debt, the long-term debt of Alberta. Keep in mind when Ralph Klein was there, hard-nosed right-wing Attila Hun, about 16 years ago, I think is when he passed over the reins, he'd managed to announce with some glee he'd paid off all of their debt. So there was no debt in Alberta in 16 years now. We're moving towards $50 billion worth of debt. And so she's adopting, in political theory, economic theory, we talk Keynesian approach, which in essence says that when nations, when organizations, when provinces are in trouble, they should spend money like this to make work, get people back to work, get the economy fired back up again. There's a lot of logic to that, but he also said that in good times, like Alberta has had with the high oil prices, they should stop their spending, they should cut back, they should roll back, they should put it away for a rainy day. Well, they talk the talk, but for some reason they found they've spent their rainy day fund, and so they're only doing one part of the hand with respect to Keynesian, which is the opposite end, just for information, as economics, is that Friedman, followed by, by Hayek, followed by Friedman, really drove globalization, are at the other end of the spectrum, which is basically free market. Get out of the way and let the marketplace decide as to what survives and what doesn't survive. So you can see those two, Plato and Aristotle, approaches to how to run business. Universities, interesting front page here that they're now suggesting, and they're trying to move over to start teaching and collaborating and working at the University of Calgary, for the first time in public-private partnerships and other these sort of skills that get applied and practical. And it's interesting to note that we've been doing it in this class for the last 15 years. So they're coming our way. U.S. warship challenges Chinese claims in the South China Sea going through there. It was interesting there. The Americans sent one of their little cruisers about 12 miles off the sand dune that they built in little floating platforms, aircraft platforms in the middle of the South China Sea to exercise their span of control over the region. And it's flying, of course, in the face of their neighbors of the Philippines and Vietnam and those sort of countries are quite concerned about the encroachment or the exercise of power over and influence over the South China Sea. And we have to understand that China for about 2,000 years saw itself, and it was recognized by the rest of the world, by Europeans and others, as the Middle Kingdom, the center of the universe. And then when the Europeans and that came into Hong Kong, Macau, and these sort of places, and did what they did to China for about 150 years, up to about 1978, was a period of humiliation for the Chinese. And now what we're seeing is this reemergence of the Middle Kingdom again, China exercising what it perceives to be its, much like the Americans, as this exceptionalism, their sense that they are the center of the universe, and now they're exercising their span of control globally, as we talked last week about the British Bank, and not British Bank, but doing the UK nuclear power plant. We would follow that conversation. So that's what's happening there, and we could talk a bit about this sharing of the rule stage between America and China, and the tensions that will arise. And I don't think either side wants a particular war, but what happens all too often in these cases is somebody at 15 levels down in the hierarchy decides to do something silly of press a rocket, press a bang, or bang a ship into another ship. And these things have a habit of spinning very quickly out of control. So it's a danger of an accident that we do have to watch for as business folks crafting strategies, because that raises temperatures, it hurts the global economy, and something we should be aware of. So that's on the page there. And it's interesting too, the Chinese are putting together their blue water navy. India's got a blue water navy starting now, and they're starting to exercise more control in the region, where before the Americans' Fifth Fleet and Seventh Fleet could sail with impunity through these waters and nothing could stand up. But increasingly, India and China are starting to exercise some span of control over the waters off their coasts. I see at Telford is going to be the new Prime Minister's Office Chief of Staff. Katie, young woman by the look of it, friend of Mr. Trudeau, interesting. It talks about this. I want to talk a bit today about discrimination in the workplace and the idea of glass ceilings and glass cliffs and ageism, things of that nature. And in your workplace, have you turned your mind to reviewing your policies on the role of all the folks in there to get a fair and equal level playing field? And it's nice here to see in the Prime Minister's office that a female is going to occupy for the second time only. I think it was Kim Campbell. When Kim was in for 9 months, she had a female, I can't recall who, but a female Prime Minister's Office Chief of Staff. And this is the second time in the history of Canada that the Prime Minister's Office had a woman in that very important seat. And we could digress too and talk a bit about the Prime Minister's Office. About what authority does it have the power that it has? It's more powerful than the people you elect. It makes decisions without talking to the people you elect. And yet nowhere in our Constitution are the provisions made for a Prime Minister's Office and the power that it exercises. So it's a worthwhile conversation today. I see Trudeau was going to help the Premier of Ontario, Wynne, set up her provincial pension plan. Wynne, as you know, in the last election, worked very hard on the 78-day election, supporting Trudeau as in his campaign to be Prime Minister. And in fact, Trudeau supported her when she ran to be Premier for the province. So there's a good relationship between Ontario and Ottawa, and that wasn't there under Harper. Harper, I think it took about a year and a half for Wynne to get in to talk about this idea of the provincial pension plan, and she took a year and a half before Harper would agree to see her, and even then it was just a 10-minute in passing at a local hotel on a way to something. He agreed to chat with her, so there was a clash between the two, and it appears now that we're going to see some good synergy development between Ontario and Ottawa, which is the engine for Canada. So that probably is a good thing. what else comes out of that? I guess that's what's interesting. The scrapping the F-35, and the question how much we'll save on that. But we had talked about purchasing 65 of these machines, and if you go online, you'll find that all the bugs aren't out of them yet. They're still breaking down and having some difficulties. But Canada, Harper was so inclined to get so tight with Americans, we put that offer in, and we're planning on going ahead with that. But the cost is astronomical. I'm trying to recall the cost is for each one of those, but quite expensive. And Trudeau has stepped in and say, no, we're going to scrap that plan altogether and start fresh at something a little more budget price. And they've named a couple of alternatives that might do the piece, to even include looking at European jets, fighter jets. And that's interesting because we tend to just look south when it comes to our military equipment. And that may be a sense, because Trudeau's father was very much a European by nature, and would have preferred to see more linkages between Europe and Canada. And I wonder to what extent young Trudeau has been acculturalized into that sort of viewpoint. Nothing wrong with it, just do you think we'll have less tighter relationships with America, or stronger? I don't know, but it'd be fun to watch. But anyway, his first thing he's done, which will not sit well with President Obama, is that we're going to cancel 65 F-35s. And so that certainly is a question. And I guess in getting those, whatever the planes are going to do, Canada's military, I view it as our insurance policy, business insurance policy. And as a result of that, Canada's underinsured. Our military is, with due respect to my colleagues out there, we have a small core of very highly trained professionals, but on the scale of things, when we stand shoulder to shoulder with others, notwithstanding the excellence that we have in the individuals, our numbers are lacking. And we don't garner. In fact, at the end of World War II, we had the fourth largest navy in the world, the fourth largest navy. Canada swung well above its weight in those days. And today, it's pitiful what we give our folks to work with and the skill sets that we have. And so we have to decide, is that what we want to spend the money on? Because if you do it there, you can't do it in other things. But I have this sense that Canadians, that are decision makers, don't have what we do in this class. What is the long-term vision for the Canadian military acting in the best interest of Canada? Not of others, but of Canada. And I'm not sure we really have answered that question. And I give us evidence of that on Canada's North. We have spent in the last couple of years over $1 billion of tight money strengthening our 49th parallel for these terrorists. But yet Canada's North is wide open. The Danes, the Russians, the Chinese, all are zooming through there with impunity through our channel. In fact, I think it was about 18 months ago, a Chinese large ship just pulled into one of our northern ports, and we have very few, completely unannounced, just pulled in. Can you imagine doing that to an American or to a Russian or whatever? Just a large ship just pull in without the courtesy of saying we're arriving, have your permission to land, and who's the harbor master? So we need to come back to that vision, is what we want to do. And I think that vision should include protecting Canada. And we have 3 oceans. One of those is the northern oceans, the Northwest Passage, and we're not doing enough up there. We talk the talk. Every year, Harper went up there and before him and made grand announcements of more money to be spent and stronger. We got the Rangers up now, just about 5,000. But we planned on new port systems in there and increasing security up there and more development for all the resources coming. And then it gets canceled quietly. The front page paper makes the announcements, and 2 or 3 months later, for some reason, we get the scrapping of the F-35s or scrapping of these new ports, or what we're doing for icebreakers, etc. Internet freedom declines for the 5th year. They do a report, a survey of how free the internet is and what you can say and what impositions, what impediments are put in there by government. And for the 5th year in a row, our freedom collectively around the globe declines. But of the 65 countries that they assessed in the report, the good news is Iceland, Estonia, and Canada were deemed the most free. And so that's interesting. Indeed, they talk about all the things that happen in some of these strange countries about the internet and the sanctions that are posted by people that transgress. And it's amazing what they for. And I noticed there's a new act coming in the States. You can Google this. I'll find it for you and we'll talk about it. But a new act, and these are my words, not theirs, but something to the effect that if on the internets you say something that is untoward, that is suspect, then you'll be running offense of a particular act that there'll be sanctions for. And I know I haven't explained that quite right, but we'll get into it this week. But have a look at that, because that's troubling if that's so. NASA is looking at landing sites on Mars. Interesting, and of course we talked about space warfare as one of the 6 domains, and habitation, and can you imagine the shock of the Americans if they look up someday and see 100,000 Chinese in some sort of habitat on the moon, and the Chinese have the capacity to get to the moon and are getting to the moon. And America gave up that race a while back, and it's now heating it back up again, much like what they're doing in the Middle East and in Iraq and Afghanistan. Initially saying we're getting out, and then the Russians said, fine, we'll fill the void, and whoops, stop, we're coming back in again. And so the same thing on the space races taking place. More on the Spratly Islands. All right, so that's that. Let's see what's in the second half of this. How am I doing? 16 minutes into the game. Okay, the dollar is down marginally, 75.5 cents. Not bad. Gold has dropped a little bit. Oil has dropped about $3 since our last one, so it's tightening up down to 43. I think it's still going to go a little lower than that before life is over. Off the chart, landlines. They're talking about online entertainment is driving spending, and where the money is going is into the internet and the movies, and it's leaving cable satellite and leaving landlines and things of that nature. I see the iPhone in China fueling record Apple sales, continues to do well on phones and the new phones they're putting out. And I guess the good thing of that I get is that I've said before that the 2 key features you need to be successful is innovation and entrepreneurship in your organizations, as a nation, etc. And here's an example of a company that exemplifies innovation and entrepreneurship and does extremely well. What hampers it, of course, is the red tape and the bureaucracy that gets in the way. But in any event, Apple's doing well, but it shows the way for us at a different level of the importance of these 2 factors that we need to grow and develop in our lives, in our businesses, and in our country. Bank restructuring, and we've talked a bit about this with the Internet of Everything going on. Banks are collapsing. Here's a chart in here showing that the bank usage by the 6 big banks by the population per branch, they were getting on average in monthly transactions about 12,000 folks a month in a typical branch, and that number has dropped now to 8,000 people in a month. And so the people that are using banks and some relationship with banks is collapsing, and more the internet online banking is rising. And we've said that I think that's a wonderful opportunity for credit unions and others it levels the playing field. I think there's no reason, particularly if credit unions come together with their associations, they can now compete with these software and online programs as institutions can. I mean, I can open up an online university tomorrow, if you'll accept what I do, and prepare this course and put it up on the site, and if you're so inclined to take the course, you could take it. And so you could you could play against the banks. So it's a great leveler. I mean, the Internet of Everything is a great leveler. Bank of Canada may adjust its core prices gauge on what's in its inflation basket, and they've done that before to say trying to keep the inflation less than 2% for us. And so they jiggle. They take out things like housing and that because it would distort that 2% figure and put them well over that figure. And now they want to readjust what's in the basket. I suspect, and I suppose I'm suspect and cynical that they want to adjust it again to keep it under 2% inflation, because that's not the case. I mean, if you live in our province in BC, you only have to look at BC Ferries and BC Hydro and your insurance rates, etc., to find that there's not a 2% increase. These are double-digit increases going on, and in large part because the government takes kickbacks from all of these government agencies of ICBC, our insurance, provincial insurance plan, BC Hydro, BC Ferries. They all give hundreds of millions of dollars back, called dividends, which is a hidden tax, back to the general revenues of the province. And again, I just wish they'd come out and tax you rather than do this hidden tricky-dicky stuff. But that's what they're doing to drive up, and so we pay more in our hydro bill to pay this extra tax. Arctic Diamonds sector is losing its luster. Canada did well, broke the De Beers chain to some extent when we found wonderful diamonds up north, and companies up there took off, did well. But with the cutback in commodities and the cutback in Asia, and less dollars to work with over there, there's less diamonds being bought, and so the commodities, the the market for diamonds is coming down. It's interesting there between blood diamonds and the Canadian polar diamonds. Ours were preferred because they weren't in with human rights and slave labor, etc. They were seen as a clean diamond. An interesting little side, and just to digress for a moment, and this the story may find of some interest, but I remember when I got married in the early 60s, it was interesting how the marketing people for diamond companies, for De Beers in those days, could influence us in what we had to buy. And so we were told in no uncertain terms, we read the paper, that if you really loved her, you would buy her a diamond that was 2 times or 3 times your monthly earnings, and not one to be seen as a piker by your neighbors. You went out all the way and bought it 2 or 3 times your monthly earnings, and that was the level of commitment for the diamond. And the second part of that, it couldn't just be any diamond. In those days, it had to be a very special blue box diamond from Burke's with a little silver thing. Anything less than that didn't count. And so the marketing people there really got in our heads and on how we had to buy diamonds. But that was just triggered that story back from years gone by. New finance minister will come in. It'll be interesting to see. And we're looking closely to see who the new finance minister will be, because remember we said, I think last week, about the 2 levers to control our economy, fiscal and monetary, and this is the fiscal lever. Whoever comes in here will be setting our budgets and our taxes, all those things that Trudeau's been talking about doing. This will be the individual that will design that and present it to Parliament shortly when your TSFAs being cut maybe back down to 5,500, etc. And so watch for who the new finance minister will be and the characteristics. Snowbirds may lose their benefits going south. My recollection is, I think it's 181 days or 183 days you're out of the province, then you have deemed disposition in most cases of your assets and have to pay taxes on them. So most snowbirds going south tend to go down and enjoy the climbs, but they beetle on back here to stay within that time frame, so they don't lose their medical plans and their CPPs and not CPP, but their medical plans, etc., the coverage of social safety nets, and so they do it quite. But the interesting thing here is that Canada and U.S. have agreed now to share the data, and they track you very accurately to include your plane flights now on what days you left the country and how long you were out. So Big Brother is just tightening up again on knowing everything you should do. The weaker loonie, our dollar is down about 25%. Due to the exchange, it's close to 30% the time you do the deal with the banks. And as a result of that, less Canadians are flying and going to the States. And now the airports were in our country, in this province. Most of us in Victoria might well fly to Seattle and pick up the cheap American flights from there to go wherever we're going. It's just a quick hop. And of course, that's not happening now. We're doing our local flights to our local airports and bypassing Seattle. And Seattle is now complaining that their sales are down dramatically because Canadians are slipping in and out of there. Yeah, the White House agreed on the debt extension, and this is very troubling, folks. You have to watch this. This American debt, as long as they can keep expanding their credit line, their credit card, and they've just moved it up now to last another 18 months, there is no problem because they can still pay what they have to pay, and the dance continues. The minute that credit line gets snapped and there's no more credit net to live within their budgets, that's when you're going to see tension in the streets as this gap between the rich and the poor take place. Right now they're up to just over $19 trillion worth of debt, but they have almost $200 trillion in contingent liabilities of social safety nets, unemployment, Obama, Medicare, etc. And there's no way they're ever going to be able to recover that. And imagine for a moment if the interest rates went up. These are historically low rates. I mean, half a point or 1 point is extremely low. So they're financing this debt at that sort of level. But imagine for a moment that the rates went just to historical levels of, say, 5 or 6%. There was a book written by Mark Stein, and Mark reports in there, he did some number crunching on it. He says, today, the Americans are spending $285 billion a year on interest only to China and others, but basically China, for their $1.8, $1.9 billion worth of treasury bills. And that's declining because they're unloading those as fast as they can. 285 billion. And it's interesting, that's the same amount you need to pay for the complete People's Liberation Army. All the military in China is paid for by Americans. And he says if the rates go back up to 5 or 6%, historic rates, not these unusual ones, he said that interest rate payment goes up to $845 billion, $845 billion. And he said that's enough to pay for a 4-time increase in the Chinese military, paid for entirely by American taxpayers. That's scary, folks. And we shouldn't throw stones. Canada's inching up debts too, in Ontario and Alberta, we just talked about, and the same sort of thing. Interest has consequences. Pipeline, so this is interesting too. The oil flow to Quebec is now leaving Oklahoma, Cushing, Oklahoma. Pipelines are down about 25% in the volume because they can't buy it from Canada anymore because we're now using it in Canada. We're shipping oil to Quebec to the refineries, and we're getting ready to ship the oil to Western refineries and not shipping it down south. And that's going to be a point of tension too, because now we're getting into the game. What the Americans in Mobile, etc. have been doing is taking the rough stuff and doing the value added. And now we're going to do some value added in Canada. And maybe that's part response to the Keystone Pipeline. But it's interesting to see we're now going to take some control over that, and it's a smart move. And we talked about discrimination. All right, and that's the national paper. The local paper, public service in BC is in disarray. Big scandal going on. And it's a tragedy. A PhD student in there, Rod McGilvray, I think it was his name, in any event committed suicide because he was so embarrassed by the allegations made, proven later to be completely false, should never have been made. The governments apologized for it, but of course he's dead now, as are the other folks who not dead, but no longer working there. A tragedy. But the issue out of that is the Freedom of Information Act and the ability for the BC government bureaucrats to completely take every dust ball out of the corner of their desks and disappear, much like Hillary's emails disappeared. And now the ombudsman has come in looking for these things, and there's not a record. In the chief of staff's file, who you would think would be on top of the scandal, not one email exists any longer about this whole incident. They've just got rid of them. And so the Freedom of Information Act and the role of government, and keep in mind those dust balls in the corner of every desk with civil servants belongs to us. It's our taxpayers. We have entitlement to go in there and have a look at it. Save and accept 5 or 6 sections of the Act that says they can keep it from us if it's one of these 6 or 7 clauses. But in this case, it's just civil disobedience, criminal. BC transit fares are going up. We've talked a bit about that. Immigrant groups. Yeah, immigrant groups continue to be a problem. We've talked about it. I've reached more for Canada coming in, and we're asking for time. We can't accommodate them as fast as they're coming. We need more time to find the housing and the safety nets and things to put it up. But the wave is coming. And this is minuscule. We're talking 25,000 Syrians coming into Canada. But imagine what's going on right now in the European, in Turkey, and threatening to come into France and to Germany, etc., and Italy. It's mind-boggling. It's destructive. They cannot accommodate it. I think we're going to see the demise of the European Union, the culture, and the balkanization of that whole section if this continues much longer. It's something quite serious we should be looking at. It's going to change completely the view of the world over there. My fat little arthritic fingers trying to move through the pages here. Maybe the pages want to be written red. Oh. Couldn't have been important. Yeah, it wasn't important. The First Nations asked court to stop Trans Mountain Pipeline, Kinder Morgan Pipeline, $5.4 billion project. First Nations say stop. We want to talk about it some more. And here I think we've discussed this idea. I mean, if we can't move the oil from Alberta somehow safely, where do the taxes, where does the money come from to pay what we pay to First Nations and the infrastructure and social? We have to find some way to break this impediment on getting fuel across there. But it's something we can look at. Is again the First Nations, the role of the First Nations and the blockage of Kinder Morgan Pipeline. Agree, disagree. Maybe we don't need the oil. Tim Hortons Global Growth. Yeah, final one here. I guess Tim Hortons is preparing for global growth and going into the States with partners. Story's good, starting to do well. But I think what's important to us is the market entry strategy, of which there are 7 sort of ways of doing it. And if you can imagine an odometer The least risk, easiest one to do, of course, is exporting. Then we have licensing, Mum's Chocolate Cake we talked about. Then we have franchising sort of as a model. Then we do sort of the joint ventures and partnerships. We do a turnkey operation. Next we might do the wholly owned subsidiary. And finally greenfields, where we'll just won't buy an existing building like this to put a university in, but we'll start with the greenfield and we'll build the building exactly the way we want it, or the car plant exactly the way we want it with the robotics. Costs a little bit more, but far more efficient. And so those degrees of risk when you want to do market entry strategy come into play. And I think we discussed some of that in your course. And I think that's it, folks. I think we've covered the papers. Good. Well, time is 30 minutes right on the dot. That's wonderful. Folks, I'm enjoying the course. I hope you're enjoying it too. Call me anytime. I'm here for you. Same routine through the weekends. After 5, I know you have to work, but I'll put the closing things up on Friday for the others. Anyway, have a good day. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.